In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to map the numbers of a die on top of a cube in Blender. So you can see when we open a brand new mesh, it comes with a cube, so we might as well just use this one. And the difficulty comes in trying to get a single two-dimensional image to map over the top of a 3D image. So this is what we call UV unwrapping and UV mapping. The reason why we call it UV is that coordinates X, Y and Z are already being used for our 3D object, and so for a two-dimensional image we use the coordinate system U and V to represent what would be an X and Y coordinate of a 2D image. So this will make sense as we start to do it. What we're going to do is split the screen in two. So we'll keep our 3D view on the left one, but in the right one we're going to change this to be our UV or image editor. And this is of course a flat two-dimensional grid that is U by V. Now what I'd like to add in here is the image that is going to be mapped over the top of my 3D shape. So I'll go to the image window, image option, choose open image, go to my desktop, and I have one called UV Unwrapping. And here, if I zoom out, you can see is a cube that has been unwrapped. And the reason why we're doing this as an example is because it perfectly makes sense as to why you would unwrap a cube and how a cube gets unwrapped. You can see that you fold these edges up and it would become a cube again. That's the whole point behind UV unwrapping. So, this object here, we need to go and work out how it becomes unwrapped itself. So when I go into edit mode, I can choose everything that's about it and press U to get the UV mapping window open and choose unwrap. And what happens is Blender tries to unwrap all the vertices and faces etc. over the top of our UV image. And you can see that what it's done is apply all of the images, all of the faces over the top of the image. Now in order to see what it looks like when it's actually applied, we can go to our viewport shading option box and choose texture. And this is what it would look like if we were to render this scene. Now that's not what I'm after. What I'd like is each of the numbers to be applied to each of the faces. So what I need to do is cut this shape up so that when it is unwrapped it matches this shape. So I'll go back to solid view, and what I need to do is select the edges that are going to be cut or become seams that would then be mapped to this image. So I'll go to edge select and I'll go back to front view, and in front view what I want to do is select the edges that are going to become what are called seams. Now think of a seam as what you would in your clothing, for instance. If you had to cut your clothing apart and make it two-dimensional, then you would cut across the seams. That's exactly what we're doing here. So I'll select the edges that I want to become seams. So I've selected these bottom three edges because they will flip open to become this number 4. So if I go on the other side, I can do the same thing to get that number 3 flap. Now that is perfectly going to unwrap and get us to 3 and 4, but I haven't made a cut that represents where the 1 and 5 have been split apart. So I really need to add one more edge, probably here. So I've selected all the edges I want to become a seam. In order to make them a seam, I open up the edge submenu by pressing Ctrl E, and then I can choose Mark Seam, and you'll see if I unselect everything that it has a red mark around everything that is now a seam. Okay, so if I select everything again and U unwrap again, now you can see that my shape pretty much matches. Now this image over here is actually where a lot of the work should be done, so I'm going to join this area and do a little bit of work here. What's actually happening here is that all the vertices and edges and faces have been mapped in 2 dimensions. Now you're not altering anything about your mesh when you alter this UV image editing window here. So what I need to do is get it to line up a little bit better. So I'm going to use scale to scale it in just a little bit. There's not so bad. And I can use grab to move it about. And remember, you're not actually editing the mesh itself. That's not too bad. And I'm trying to get it to line up as best I can to sort of match the picture itself. Now, I'll be okay with that, but just be aware that you can do any type of alteration here. You can rotate if you wanted. You can pick out specific vertices if you wanted this particular vertice to be over here. And wherever it matches up, the image underneath gets applied to the face that is inside here. So I will bring back my 3D view. So I've got one 3D view, one UV image. And again, I'll go back to the viewport shading and change it to texture again. And now you can see it looks like it's starting to be applied correctly. Now you can see there's a lot of black faces. That's because the light source is not actually lighting up the faces. So what I need to do is go back to object mode and make a few more lights. Make sure that I can get some light that covers everything. So I'm just using Shift D to duplicate the same one. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. I just want to make sure that I've got enough lights to shine on all the sides and show it off. So there you can see my cube now has an image applied to it that has the images of all the dice numbers. Now, so let's see what it looks like when I render it. F12. Now that's not correct. Now that's because we have applied the vertices to our UV image, but we have not applied the image in texture mode to the actual mesh. So I'll go back to 3D view here. I'm going to join these two windows just to give myself a bit more room. And let's pull our menu back out, our properties back out. And if I select my main object, I can now go over to the Materials tab, which has a material applied, but I need to alter the texture that is within that material so that it actually applies our UV image. So I do that via this type menu here, and I don't want this to be one of these sort of textures here. I actually want an image to be mine. So I can now go down and choose the image that I want to be applied, which is of course my UV unwrapping picture. Now it's not going to be applied correctly by default, so if I go down to the mapping submenu here, you can choose in this coordinates option box how it gets applied, and in our case it is of course UV. So now if I press F12 for a render, you can see it looks perfect.